France, the land of art, romance, and revolution. For centuries it lectured the world about liberty, equality, and fraternity. But today, the headlines from Paris tell a very different story. One not of grandeur, but of debt. France's national debt has surged past $3.4 trillion, the highest in its modern history. The nation that once dictated how others should manage their finances can no longer manage its own. Streets filled with protests, governments collapsing like paper castles, and yet, France still lectures the world about fiscal responsibility. How did we get here? How did a symbol of European power become a cautionary tale? This crisis didn't happen overnight. It's the result of decades of political comfort, promises without payment, votes bought with borrowed money, and leaders who found it easier to postpone the pain than face the truth. Now that truth has come due, and the bill is staggering. But beneath the numbers lies something deeper, a moral crisis. A generation built a welfare state they could no longer afford, and their children are left to shoulder the weight. The very ideals that once inspired the West, fairness, solidarity, justice, now seem to be collapsing under their own contradictions. For Americans watching from afar, this isn't just Europe's problem. When a great economy stumbles, the tremors reach across oceans. To our markets, our retirement funds, and our family's future. Because this story isn't just about France, it's about the fragile line between compassion and recklessness, between caring for people and deceiving them with unsustainable promises. And so tonight, we ask the question that matters most. What broke inside France's model? And could the same cracks appear here in America? If you believe in justice, responsibility, and truth, stay with me. Because behind every trillion in debt lies a moral choice. And sooner or later, every nation must decide who it really is. Let's start with the numbers, because numbers don't lie, even when politicians do. By the end of 2024, France's public debt had reached $3.4 trillion, roughly 110% of its GDP. The budget deficit was hovering around 5.8%, nearly double what European rules allow. These aren't abstract statistics. They are a mirror reflecting decades of denial. For years, France lived on borrowed comfort. Successive governments, left, right, and center, promised protection to everyone: retirees, civil servants, the unemployed, the young. No one wanted to say no. Each election brought new spending pledges, higher subsidies, more benefits, new social programs. It was politics on credit. And as long as interest rates stayed low, the illusion survived. But then came inflation, higher rates, and slower growth. Suddenly the illusion cracked. Today, France spends more than $55 billion every year just to service its debt. Money that doesn't build schools, fix roads, or support hospitals. It simply pays for yesterday's comfort. When the European Commission launched the excessive deficit procedure, it was a polite but firm message: you're breaking the rules. And in May 2024, S&P Global Ratings echoed that warning, downgrading France's credit rating to AA, citing widening deficits and weak fiscal discipline. Yet inside France, the debate wasn't about solutions. It was about pride. Politicians blamed Brussels. Protesters blamed the rich. The government blamed global instability. But few wanted to look in the mirror. Because the truth was painful. France had been spending beyond its means for decades, not because it was evil, but because it couldn't face the consequences of saying no. In Paris cafes, people joke that France is too beautiful to fail. But markets don't care about beauty. Investors look at numbers, not monuments. When they see a government that spends $1.20 for every $1 it earns, they start to worry. And they should. Because France isn't just another country. It's the second largest economy in the Eurozone. If it stumbles, Europe trembles. If Europe trembles, the world feels it. That's what makes this story more than European gossip. It's a global alarm bell. When nations forget that budgets are moral documents, they lose more than credit ratings. They lose credibility. Behind every trillion in debt lies a promise someone made, and someone else must keep. Behind every subsidy, there's a taxpayer. Behind every borrowed euro, there's a future generation asked to pay for the past. France's streets are filled again, not with tourists, but with protests. Workers, teachers, and nurses shouting about cuts, taxes, and lost faith in their leaders. Some demand more spending, others demand more accountability, but all of them share one emotion: fear. Fear that their pensions will shrink, fear that their jobs will vanish, fear that the country they love has lost control of its destiny. And here's the irony. The same France that once preached financial virtue to Southern Europe, to Italy, to Greece, to Spain, now finds itself under the same microscope it once held over others. It's a sobering reminder: arrogance has a price. Still, beyond the statistics and scolding, there's a lesson of humility here for all nations. Because every democracy faces the same temptation: to give more than it can afford, to please voters today at the cost of tomorrow. France isn't unique, it's simply first in line, and perhaps that's why this story matters so deeply to Americans. Because when you see a proud, civilized nation drowning in debt, not from war, but from comfort, you have to ask, could this be us someday? Could America too be living on borrowed time and borrowed money? If you believe a nation's strength comes not from spending, but from self-control, stay with me. Because next, we'll uncover how politics, not economics, turned France's problem into a full-blown crisis. The breaking point didn't come from an economist's report or a credit downgrade. It came from the streets. When Paris burns, the world watches. Protesters filled the boulevards once again, waving flags, banging pots, shouting slogans that mixed anger with despair. From Marseille to Lyon, from students to retirees, they all shared the same cry: we can't take it anymore. For decades, the French state promised to protect everyone, from cradle to grave. But now the cradle is empty, and the grave is growing deeper. As debt piles up, the welfare net begins to tear. Pension reforms, once unthinkable, are back on the table. Gas subsidies, social benefits, education grants, all are shrinking. The same citizens who were told the government will take care of you now discover the government is broke. And the betrayal cuts deep. Because this isn't just a fiscal crisis, it's a crisis of faith. In the 1960s, France believed in progress. In the 1980s, it believed in equality. Today, it believes in nothing but survival. Across Europe, leaders whisper nervously, if France, the beating heart of the European Union, can't control its spending, what does that say about Europe's future? The European Commission demands fiscal discipline, but each government fears the same backlash: protests, strikes, political collapse. In Berlin, officials remember 2010, when Greece nearly broke the euro. Not again, they say. But the numbers tell a different story. France's debt is 10 times larger. Meanwhile, in Washington, analysts at the Federal Reserve and Treasury watch closely. A French debt spiral could trigger a wave of uncertainty across the Atlantic. Higher yields, weaker confidence, slower trade. The American economy, so intertwined with Europe, would not escape untouched. Yet the most striking reaction isn't from markets or ministers. It's from ordinary French people. Ask them, and they'll tell you, we don't trust anyone anymore. Trust, once the glue of democracy, is dissolving. When citizens stop believing their leaders, when voters think every promise is a lie, and when governments stop fearing accountability, democracy begins to decay from within. And that's what we're witnessing. France's debt isn't just financial, it's spiritual. It's the debt of a nation that borrowed too much comfort, too much pride, too much illusion. Now it's time to pay, not just in euros, but in credibility. In church pews across rural France, older believers whisper prayers for their country, not for money, but for wisdom. Because they know no nation can live forever beyond its means. You can print currency, but not conscience. The irony is painful. A country that once symbolized enlightenment is now stumbling in the dark, unsure of its path, unsure of its faith, both in God and in government. But the story isn't over, because France's collapse is not inevitable, not yet. There are still voices calling for reform, courage, and truth. Economists urging spending cuts, priests reminding people of moral duty, parents teaching their children that freedom without responsibility is just another form of slavery. Still, the clock is ticking. The longer France delays, the deeper the hole becomes. The debt doesn't forgive, and neither does history. And as the sun sets over the Seine, one can't help but wonder, will this be remembered as the moment France finally woke up, or the moment it quietly gave up? If you believe that faith, discipline, and truth are what hold nations together, stay with me. Because next, we'll explore the civil and political consequences of France's crisis, and why its echoes may soon reach your own doorstep. When a country's finances crumble, it's not just the economy that suffers, it's the soul of the nation. In France, that soul is now divided. The social contract that once defined the republic, equality, solidarity, security, is fracturing. Trust in government has collapsed to historic lows. Polls show that more than 2/3 of French citizens no longer believe their leaders can fix the crisis. Parliament debates have turned into shouting matches, while voters drift toward extremes, left and right, seeking simple answers to complex wounds. In the suburbs, teachers strike for higher pay. In small towns, doctors close their clinics because the state can't reimburse them fast enough. Rural France, long ignored by Paris, is sinking into quiet despair. And amid this chaos, the middle class, the very backbone of the nation, feels betrayed. They work, they pay taxes, yet they see their savings vanish in inflation, and their children leaving for better futures abroad. This is how civilizations weaken, not with explosions, but with erosion, not with war, but with weariness. When people stop believing that honesty matters, in money, in politics, in life, decay becomes destiny. On the political front, the old guard is losing control. The president's approval ratings fall with every budget debate. Populists rise, promising to tear up EU rules, defy austerity, and put France first. But history warns us, every time anger replaces wisdom, chaos follows. The streets that once echoed with revolution now tremble with resentment. Meanwhile, Europe watches nervously. Germany, already carrying the Eurozone's weight, fears contagion. Italy, Spain, and Belgium struggle with their own debts. Brussels faces a dilemma: enforce discipline and fuel rebellion, or forgive France and risk moral collapse across the bloc. Whichever path it chooses, Europe's credibility will be tested. Across the Atlantic, American policymakers take note. The same debates that paralyze Paris, welfare versus work, taxation versus fairness, promises versus responsibility, echo in Washington. For older Americans who lived through recessions and watched inflation eat their savings, France's story feels uncomfortably familiar. It's a warning whispered across the ocean. No nation, however rich or righteous, is immune from the math of reality. And yet, there's something uniquely human in this tragedy. Because at its heart, France's debt isn't about numbers. It's about values. The belief that compassion could exist without discipline, that generosity could thrive without limits, that justice could be bought with borrowed money. But true justice, the kind that lasts, is built on truth. And the truth is simple. You cannot build a future on a foundation of debt. Not for a nation, not for a family, not for a soul. In the countryside where life still moves slowly, old farmers speak with a clarity that economists envy. They say, "You reap what you sow," and France is reaping what it sowed. Years of easy promises, unearned comfort, and moral shortcuts disguised as compassion. Still, not all is lost. Within the pain lies a chance for humility, for renewal, for courage. If France can rediscover the virtues that made it great, discipline, dignity, and duty, it may yet find redemption. But redemption begins not in the halls of Parliament, but in the hearts of its people. Because before a nation can balance its books, it must balance its conscience. If you believe that moral strength is the first pillar of national strength, stay with me. Because next, we'll turn to America's perspective. What this French tragedy teaches us about our own future, and how faith and responsibility might yet keep us from repeating their mistakes. For Americans over 50, France's turmoil isn't a distant drama. It's a mirror and a map. A mirror because we recognize the same tensions in our own debates: compassion versus discipline, growth versus promises. A map because the path France chooses will shape markets and policy far beyond Paris. Start with your household economy. If Europe's second-largest economy slows under the weight of debt and deficit rules, global investors may demand higher yields to lend to governments. That raises a floor under interest rates, nudging up costs for U.S. mortgages, municipal bonds, and corporate borrowing. For retirees, that can cut two ways: safer income from treasuries, yes, but also pressure on stocks you own through index funds, and stress on communities that finance hospitals, roads, and schools through debt. Prudence in Paris, oddly enough, becomes stability in Peoria. Next, security. A distracted France means a distracted Europe. When budgets tighten, defense plans slip. NATO's eastern flank still needs credible deterrence. If fiscal strain slows procurement or undermines political unity, the burden shifts, again, to the United States. That's not just strategy. That's sons and daughters in uniform. Families feel the cost when allies can't carry their share. Then values. Europe's social model aspires to dignity and solidarity. Those are honorable goals, but dignity without truth decays into debt. Solidarity without limits turns today's kindness into tomorrow's hardship. American seniors know this from life, not lectures. You built families by saying no to yourselves, so you could say yes to your children. Nations must do the same. There is, however, opportunity. If France embraces honest consolidation, protecting the vulnerable while trimming excess and investing in productivity, it could restore confidence across Europe. That would steady the euro, calm bond markets, and support global demand, a quiet win for American savers. And it would model a kind of leadership our age sorely needs. Compassionate but accountable, generous but grounded. So what should America do? Tell the truth about our own long-term liabilities. Align promises with growth, reward work, family formation, and enterprise. Protect the poor with targeted help, not permanent illusions. And remember, budgets are moral documents before they are spreadsheets. If you believe that a nation's heart is measured by both its mercy and its self-control, stay with me. Next, we'll close with a sober warning. and a hopeful path. For France, for Europe, and for us. The choices we can make now to keep faith with our children. Here is the quiet warning. Nations do not fall in a single night. They drift. They take one more loan, make one more promise, postpone one more reform, until the future arrives with a bill and no one left to pay it. France's crisis is not merely about money. It is about memory. A country forgetting the virtues that made it strong. Work, restraint, gratitude, and truth. But here is the hope. What is learned can be relearned. A country can change course the way a family does, by telling the truth at the kitchen table, accepting limits, and choosing sacrifice for the sake of the children. Renewal begins where denial ends. For France, the path forward is not humiliation, but humility. Protect the vulnerable, yes, the widow, the disabled, the child. But do it with candor. Temporary help, targeted wisely, anchored in growth and work. Trim what flatters but does not serve. Invest in productivity, not political theater. Meet commitments, even when it hurts. Markets notice courage, so do citizens. Trust can be rebuilt when leaders speak plainly and live within the same rules as everyone else. For America, the lesson is intimate. We must align our compassion with our capacity. We owe our grandchildren more than slogans. We owe them solvency. That means budgeting like families of faith have always done. First things first, no deception, no debt we cannot bear. It means honoring marriage, work, and children, the real engines of prosperity, and resisting the easy lie that government can replace what only families and communities can provide. And for each of us, there is a spiritual choice. We can curse the darkness, or we can light a candle in our homes, our churches, our neighborhoods. Responsibility is love with sleeves rolled up. When we live that way, politics follows. So let me leave you with a question worthy of a great people. What reform would you accept today? Calmly, honestly, even painfully, so that your children can breathe easier tomorrow. If you believe that justice and dignity start with truth, hold that thought close, share it at your table, and teach it to the young. May France find the courage to choose truth over comfort, and may we do the same, with clear eyes, steady hands, and faithful hearts. May God bless the families who carry the weight of tomorrow, and grant wisdom to those who lead.